and the 4 representatives of the UNCCD Science Policy Interface to address your comments and questions.
Thank you, Chair, for giving the SPI the floor to respond to the important comments and questions we received from the distinguished delegates. We will respond to these questions through the Objective 1.2 lens and through the Objective 1.1 lens. This means that we will now go through all the received questions and comments. I will start, and then I will give the floor to my colleagues from Objective 1.1 to continue. Thank you. I would now like to start with the first comment, which was provided by the distinguished delegate from India. We very warmly appreciate all the aspects which were mentioned and all the elements which will provide and are included in the development of an enabling environment for implementing LDN. We also most warmly appreciate that India informs us about their own studies on the economics of land degradation, which is really important. I would personally just like to make one statement on behalf, I think, also of our SPI members. We really appreciate the comment made by India that perceived our work as a very honest and well done work, and this really touched our hearts, I think. I think my colleagues agree. I would like to continue with Argentina. This is a comment basically made on soil organic carbon, which my colleagues Jean-Luc Schott and Eremias Betemariam will now address.
Me? Yes. Okay. Thanks a lot, Mariam. So, thanks for your valuable comment, delegate from Argentina, and what we did with Ermias and we merged, you know, comment about soil organic carbon in arid land and soil organic carbon comment on soil organic carbon precision and sensitivity to change according time scale change. Some of your comments focus on the project level, which was our goal. SPI fully agree on the fact that arid lands is one of ecosystem among the others to be looked at to address degradation and desertification. SPI fully agree on the fact that SOC in arid lands is lower than other systems. So SPI fully agree on the comments saying that biomass production is a key issue it is in other ecosystem. Innovative technology and approaches are needed to increase soil land productivity. Decision trees on page 24 and 25 on CST/2 document provide guidance on addressing low-level precision in selecting soil SLM and identifying where improvement in SOC assessment are valuable. SPI draw your attention that the fact that SOC is not always a primary need to assess land degradation and restoration. On decision tree on page 26 of CST/2 document, this decision tree helps decision to identify essential area for SOC assessment. Where it is essential, SPI draw your attention of decision tree of page 24 and 25 on CST doc, which can help address the need of precision. By addressing and replying this question, we hope to have addressed question raised by Argentina, Egypt, Iran, Nigeria, Syria, Oman, Indonesia, Iraq, and Sudan, addressing arid land SOC precision and change. We understood that some of your comments were referring to national and global level. I refer to the Secretariat.
Thank you. I will now continue with the comment made by Senegal and the question which the distinguished delegate from Senegal addressed. Several elements were appreciated which are mentioned in our document. The comment came on the integration of LDN in national policies and across sectors. We very much agree to this statement made by the distinguished delegate from Senegal, and we would like to indicate that in recommendation 1 in the CST document, this issue has been addressed, inviting parties to ensure that LDN targets are mainstreamed in national strategies, and also looking into institutional aspects, integrational arrangements, etc. So we agree that this is a very important point. The next one is on the need for capacity building within countries and awareness raising to implement LDN, and on soil organic carbon. This is a very important issue which both objectives 1.1 and 1.2 have addressed in several recommendations and sub-point 2 recommendations. We see this as very important, so we would like to invite you to look at recommendations 1, 2, and 4 specifically. Taking into account the issue of economics, this is an issue that was brought forth by the delegation from Senegal and from Switzerland. We would like to highlight the recommendation 5 specifically, and would like to point out that creating an enabling environment is just about everything that has to do to improve and maintain human well-being and livelihoods. And there, of course, revenues, economic situations are the basis, a central or overarching theme of our work. We would like to mention that the specific issues regarding the economics of land degradation and implementing measures are being taken care of by an international project called the Economics of Land Degradation. And we were very concerned or very focused on the point that we do not want to create any duplications in efforts. We are in contact with the project leads of this project on the economics of land degradation, and we realize that one knowledge gap that remains is the aspect on trade-offs. So the objective 1.2 has focused on this, and we will be proposing the continuation of work on trade-offs in the next work program of the SPI. We would also like to show the strong connections between the work which we did on the economics of land on the creation of an enabling environment with experts working on the economics of land degradation by showing that we invited experts from the project of the economics of land degradation to be the external reviewers of our technical report emerging from objective 1.2. This was really very, very important for us, and so we highly appreciate that distinguished delegations point to this very important factor as well. I would like to continue with comments raised by Morocco. I will be just responding to some aspects of Morocco's comments, and I would like to invite the Secretariat to take over other aspects. So one aspect which was really very important for our work, that was the development of partnerships and integration of our work, not only at the disciplinary level, not only at the national level, but also at the international level. So we absolutely agree with the delegate, the distinguished delegate from Morocco, that a system, a global coordination system, has to look into our findings and see that these benefit the CBD, the UNFCCC as well. And this work, creating synergies in this area, are highly relevant, and we absolutely agree. The distinguished delegate from Morocco also underlined the need for targeted action. This is the basis of our SPI work, that we propose actionable elements that help support creating an enabling environment, and we highly appreciate the emphasis on actions that are now required. I now hand over to the Secretariat.
Thank you for continuing with the comments made by the Honorable Delegate from Morocco and the question about synergies. I just wanted you all to be aware that this is a very important aspect of the philosophy that the new Executive Secretary, Ibrahim Thiaw, has brought to the Secretariat. In his first week, he had a meeting with the Executive Secretaries of CBD and UNFCCC. He's already, with them, created a process of town halls where they, when they're available in the same place and staff are, it happened in Bonn recently, that they actually have a town hall with staff so that they can address issues in common. In addition, I draw your attention to the agenda on Monday, September 10th, where there is a roundtable on land, climate, and renewable energy, and there is an opportunity to look at those synergies further there. There also is a ministerial luncheon that's being brought forward by the Deputy Secretary General, who will be here. Again, this theme is there. And so my last comment is that luncheon is the last interaction that many of you will have before the Secretary General's Climate Action Summit, which takes place the 23rd of September in New York. And one of the first things that the Executive Secretary did was engage us in that process because of the fundamental role of land. So we've definitely heard your comment. And then if you would indulge me to go back to the request made by Jean-Luc for me to note on the comments that were made by many countries discussing soil organic carbon estimation and the challenges that they may be facing at the project level. In most cases, you also mentioned challenges at the national and global level. And I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that that topic is a CREEC document, so it's being discussed in the other subsidiary body because that was the focus of the intersessional session of the CREEC in Guyana. And so there, in other words, my point is that your concerns are actually being discussed in this COP. Thank you.
I would like to address the comment made by the distinguished delegate from Saudi Arabia on the access to data and information, and that this is needed by all countries. And I would like to point out that there will be a CST5 document which will be addressing this issue and providing some solution, and this will be discussed, I believe, later on this week. Perfect. I would now like to come to the comment. Excuse me? My colleagues from Objective 1.1 would like to address the comment made by the distinguished delegate from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. I think, we also considered also the distinguished, representative here also is not from Egypt, not only from Saudi Arabia, from Egypt, Iran, Sudan, Syria, Oman, Italy, and then Indonesia, really brought up very interesting issue about data quality, measurement, monitoring, and then also the scale issue from Indonesia. I think soil organic carbon measurement and data quality and then accuracy is really extremely important, and then we are so glad to hear that you brought that up. And then the whole intention of the decision trees that we are really putting into this technical report and then also in the proposal is to really guide countries to be able to give answer to some of these very critical and persistent questions. So particularly if you just refer on decision tree on page 22, that is the kind of guideline or a generic framework that could really help you. Where are you in terms of data availability, and then also in terms of also all these capacity topics. And then, it is obvious that we also, SPI also consider that there are some places or some countries where there is enough data, and then there are also other places where there is also no, strong data. And then in some places there is also strong capacity, and then in some places, some countries may not have also very strong capacity. So this decision tree really is intended to help you that, where am I in this whole process? And then it will really help you to make a very informed decision what to do next. So in terms of also a little bit of also advanced remote sensing, and then also a distinguished also delegate from Italy mentioned the improvement of also geoinformatics and observation data sets. I think that's also very important. But in this document we also mentioned the value of measurement and then the value also modeling, because oftentimes some people say that, do I need to go to modeling or measurements? And then when you rely too much on modeling, and then I think really to help us in terms of scaling and reducing the cost, but there is a trade-off in terms of accuracy and precision when you're reporting. So these decision trees really will help you to go through and then what is really expected, because, every country is really unique by its own. So I think those are really well addressed in the decision trees. And then one strong comment we gave, helpful comment we also brought up is that it is really good to complement models whenever possible with measurements. And then particularly we need to have this kind of thing in key ecosystems perhaps, so that that learning process will really help us to make the models more robust and more strong, so that it can also reduce the trade-offs with cost and accuracy when it comes to measurement. And then the other proposal also we mentioned this morning was also, I think also it is very good to, make a very good, collaboration with technical institutions within the region, within the country, and then elsewhere, so that because there are, capacities in terms of SLM, soil organic carbon relationship, and then also there are capacities in terms of, measuring and then also modeling. So I think more or less I would say, I think we have, that's what, the whole intention of the decision trees are really to help particularly your decision makers and then with the land managers. And then I think that is really my short answer for in terms of capacity and then data availability. And then also if you ask me, one thing, sometimes there are also data, but we may not know that it is available, or we don't know how to really play with it. I think it's also the capacity issue. If I just give you my own example from Africa, and soil information in terms of the Africa Soil Information Services, together with the ISRIC and the others, they will really be able to produce 250-meter resolution soil organic carbon map of Sub-Saharan Africa. So every country could be able to really get and then evaluate and then validate and then make use of it. I think there is a lot of data somehow, and then I think the utilization of that data is a little bit low. So that's why we really would like also parties to make this kind of connection with the technical partners to fill any gap that you see. Thank you so much, and then back to the chair. Yeah.
Thank you, Ermias, for this very important and useful comment. I would like to highlight that several distinguished delegates also pointed to the need for territorial planning, a holistic approach, and participatory planning. We couldn't agree more. And therefore, if we invite you to look at our document CST6 on the future work program of the SPI, Objective 1, where this is being addressed, and this is in your hands, how this will be continued. I would like to address the comment provided by the distinguished delegate from the Republic of South Africa, referring to our document CST, page 17, para 5, section C, on why the term youth is missing in this para, which addresses the gender perspective on the implementation of LDN. We find it is an important aspect which is included in this gender aspect, in this para addressing gender, because we did not differentiate between elderly women or younger women. So this gender para addresses both. I would now like to come to the intervention, the comments made by the distinguished delegate from Bangladesh. It is on 3 matters. Firstly, on how LDN can support securing water. This question was clearly targeted to the Secretariat. The Secretariat was asked to respond to that. The second and third issues raised by the distinguished delegate from Bangladesh addresses capacity building and the needs for resources. The SPI absolutely agrees that these aspects of capacity building and the needs for resources to implement LDN, these are major issues which have emerged also under Objective 1.2 on the creation of an enabling environment. And we kindly invite you to look at Recommendation 2, that clearly expresses this need. And finally, I would like to give the Secretariat briefly the possibility to respond to the question on water and LDN, which was posed by the distinguished delegate from Bangladesh.
So the comment specifically was about transboundary water issues, and it is, first I will say that the document where we touch directly upon water and drought is actually being presented tomorrow, which is CST3. However, the focus of that document is still, as was pointed out by Bangladesh, more on the ground basis. But the proposal from Bangladesh was to urge a regional approach to the pursuit of LDN, and that is something that parties may wish to consider in their approach to the recommendations in the contact group.
Thank you. And finally, I would like to come to the comment made by the distinguished delegate from Italy. There were comments which were provided, but no specific questions, and we agreed to all aspects which were commented by the distinguished delegate from Italy, touching on the aspects of synergies that need to be there between nations, at the national levels, at the international level, and at the level of existing conventions. We thank Italy for informing us that the indicators are being used in order to refine measurements, in order to support national actions in Italy. I will now look at my colleagues to see if we have covered all comments. I see Eremias.
Yeah, mine is not more of a comment, but just to tell you that I think SPI is also organizing a science day this week, and then it would be interesting that to discuss some of these things more technically, and then perhaps your technical focal points, and then someone interested could also be having that data. Would be also very good to interact more on some of the issues, maybe. Thank you.
So I would like to address comments that were made by the honorable delegates of Niger and Iraq that were linked to the capacity building, but in a way that actually is being addressed at some level, maybe not exactly the way that your comments were posed, in Creek Document 8, which is focused on capacity building. So the comment was related to a vision for capacity building and growing that and expanding upon it. There also were comments about observatories, et cetera. So that process is going forward. And a moment ago I mentioned there were comments that came from Italy and Egypt and others that touched on the national aspect of soil organic carbon measurement and monitoring. And the document is Creek 3 that will be discussed in the Creek plenary.
Thank you, Secretariat. So the SPI addressed questions of specific questions coming from distinguished delegations, and we also bundled certain questions where we had the feeling that they were being, they could be addressed in one response. We hope that we have covered all the comments and questions. And with this, I would like to thank you for your interest in our work. And I would now like to hand over to our chair.
Before I proceed, I'd like to find out, distinguished delegate from South Africa, are you making a request to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank Dr. Miriam Atka-Schuster for her response. But I'm sorry, I disagree with the gender issue. She says that Dr. Schuster said, Miriam Atka-Schuster said, gender equality enables women. A woman does not include young men. And gender includes women but not youth. So she explained that youth is included in the gender equality and enables women, and they don't make a difference between young and elderly women. It's not young men. So I am not happy with this answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So the comment made by the distinguished delegate from South Africa is well noted. I wanted to point out that the SPI actually did have a number of discussions about youth, and this paragraph certainly could include the word the way you described it. However, we were also cautioned that there is a whole body of policy and literature here that has some sensitivities, such as child labor laws, that kind of thing. And so in the end, this was more on the soil organic carbon side. On the ground side, that's where that recommendation comes from. They made the decision not to include it directly. However, it is something that could be introduced as a theme that could go forward. So I think there was a mix of not being prepared for something as large as that and not taking a chance of opening a problem because we were not informed well enough to answer that properly. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you all for your comments and the questions that you posed. I'd like also to thank the SPI and the Secretariat for their responses. Before closing this agenda item, I would like to present some concluding remarks based on our discussions this afternoon, yes. Our colleagues from the SPI introduced the results of their work to provide a scientific foundation for the implementation of LDN, building off the scientific conceptual framework for LDN, which the parties endorsed at COP13. They have addressed this at two levels. First, implementation of interventions on the ground, and second, the broader enabling environment for LDN necessary for those interventions. For the former, the SPI focused on the pivotal role of soil organic carbon for achieving multiple benefits of SLM interventions, where they have proved powerful decision trees. They have produced powerful decision trees, helping policymakers work with land managers to do the right thing in the right place at the right scale. For the latter, guidance that supports countries in creating an enabling environment for LDN planning and implementation, which focuses on 4 dimensions: appropriate and inclusive policies and regulations, engaged institutions, access to finance, and an effective link between science and policy at the national level. These were identified as 2 major unmet needs, which complement the hands-on work of technical implementation. Technical implementation partners, as well as line agencies of governments. The committee has thus concluded its discussion of agenda item 2A. Further discussions will take place in the CST contact group to be established. I now invite the committee to turn to agenda item 2C, entitled Coordination Activities of the Science Policy Interface Work Program 2018 to 2019, for which you have before you document ICCD/COP14/CST4. I would now like to give the floor to the UNCCD Secretariat to introduce the agenda sub-item. Mr. Baron, you have the floor.
As noted, this sub-agenda item is a continuation of work on the work program of the Science Policy Interface over the last biennium. This document is focused on cooperation between the SPI and other scientific mechanisms. And this includes a summary of what those mechanisms and the SPI have been doing in collaboration over the past 2 years. And for those, the work which reached culmination and was in the position to be reviewed, this also was done through analysis, and we will learn more about the connection between the results that were achieved in these major bodies and its relevance to the UNCCD.
I thank you, Mr. O. I now give the floor to Ms. Mariam Akhtar-Schuster and Ms. Nicole Badger, representatives of the UNCCD Science Policy Interface, who will introduce the document ICCD/COP14/CST/4. Ms. Akhtar Schuster, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. My colleague, Professor Nicole Barger, and I will jointly be presenting the policy-oriented recommendations resulting from the cooperation with other intergovernmental scientific panels and bodies as outlined in CST Document 4. Over the last year alone, scientific assessments produced by the intergovernmental panels and bodies have increased global awareness of the impacts of land degradation. In fact, these scientific reports show that land degradation, climate change, and biodiversity loss in tandem are affecting the well-being and livelihoods of people. The pictures which you see in front of you show the increasing global awareness of the impacts of land degradation on people and their well-being. And the picture on the left side emerged in the media when the land degradation and restoration assessment, which was carried out by the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, was released last year. And the picture on the right shows how media responded to the effects of climate on human well-being. This report was a special report which was produced by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and was approved in the beginning of August this year at the 50th plenary of IPCC. We would like to visualize what cooperation with other intergovernmental scientific panels and bodies have led to, based on the decision which was given to us that we should work with other bodies and panels. So cooperation with other intergovernmental scientific panels and bodies during the biennium 2018 and 2019 have led to policy-oriented recommendations, which you can see in the document CST4. But what we as scientists would also like to highlight is that these policy-oriented recommendations may lead to decisions which will lead to, which will have an impact or which will influence future cooperation with other intergovernmental scientific panels and bodies. And thus a circle is closed. And we would really like to highlight how things are affecting, influencing each other. It's not an arrow just in one direction. Recommendations are presented, decisions are made, full stop. No, there is a continuation in the process because these decisions are carefully studied by the UNCCD SPI and also by other bodies to further interact in the future under the future work program. As defined in decisions 23/COP11 and decision 19/COP12, the science policy interface of the UNCCD under the leadership of the Bureau of the Committee on Science and Technology has been requested by the Conference of the Parties to interact with several existing scientific mechanisms in order to provide the CST with clear and well-defined thematic guidance of scientific knowledge requirements for implementing the UNCCD. In line with its mandate as defined in these two decisions, the SPI, under the leadership of the Bureau of the CST, has been requested by the Conference of the Parties to interact with several existing scientific mechanisms under its work program 2018-2019. By its decision 19/COP13 and decision 21/COP13, both taken in Ordos in 2017, the SPI was requested to help and review those scientific reports listed in its 2018-2019 work program, which would be published during this biennium to provide the CST with clear and well-defined thematic guidance on scientific knowledge and requirements for implementing the UNCCD. Furthermore, the COP in Decision 19 COP/COP13 requested the SPI in close collaboration with the Secretariat to clarify the potential benefits, costs, conditions, and procedures for establishing more formal relationships between the SPI, the IPBES, the IPCC, and the ITPS. So between the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, between the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, between the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils, and the IRP, the International Resource Panel, in order to develop synergies and avoid duplications in efforts. By the same decision, the COP encouraged the SPI to continue fostering partnership with scientific bodies and institutions, international organizations, and civil society organizations. So this report will provide a synthesis of the cooperation with all these bodies as outlined in our work program, and which have provided guidance which are relevant in the context of the UNCCD. And here I would like to introduce those scientific panels and bodies which are a crucial element of the SPI work program 2018-2019. So it's the IPBES, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. It is the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It is the ITPS, the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils of the Global Soil Partnership of the Food and Agricultural Organization. It is the International Resources Panel of the UNEP, the Global Land Outlook, and the Global Land Indicators Initiatives of the United Nations Human Settlement. So we had altogether 6 bodies with whom we interacted besides our 2 objectives which were introduced to you in the morning session. The extent and depth of the cooperation with these 6 bodies during the biennium 2018-2019 was determined by the specific mandate of each panel or body, and based on this by their specific procedures, by their specific regulations, and by their work programs and by their specific timelines. The second part of this presentation will therefore also present a summary of relevant findings to the UNCCD emerging from 3 scientific reports prepared by the IPBES and by the IRP, which were finalized during the biennium 2018 and 2019, and the results are included as proposals for consideration by the CST at this session. And you may wish to consider these proposals for the development as appropriate of recommendations to the COP. So these are the 2 which my colleague, Professor Nicole Barger, will be introducing later on and in more detail. In keeping with Decision 21 COP13, the SPI, as part of its SPI work program for 2018-2019, cooperated specifically with the IPBES, because that report was finalized during the biennium of our outgoing work program. We reviewed the key messages emerging from the IPBES assessment report on land degradation and restoration, which are relevant for the UNCCD. We submitted 458 comments in 3 review cycles of the land degradation and restoration assessment. The review cycles are determined by procedures of the IPBES, and we respected the timeline which was provided us by the IPBES Secretariat. We also reviewed the IPBES Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and specifically its associated summary for policymakers. I would like to highlight here that this global assessment was released at the beginning of May. That means just a few weeks before we had to finalize and submit our SPI documents for translation to Geneva. Therefore, we could only in more detail consider the high-level messages which are included in the summary for policymakers of the Global Biodiversity Assessment Report. The entire Global Assessment Report has 1,800 pages, and we acknowledge that this will need more detailed consideration in future. I would like to highlight that in Chapter 2 of the full technical report of the IPBES, LDN is mentioned as an important aspect. So we are considered in this report. I would also like to point out that the co-chair of this global assessment will be attending the SPI Science Day in the Rio Pavilions end of this week, and will be presenting in more detail this report. And you're more than welcome to come and listen to somebody under whose leadership this report was developed. I would now like to continue with the next. The SPI, in line with Decision 21 COP13, also worked with the IPCC. We, the SPI, contributed to the scientific review of the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change, Desertification, Land Degradation, Sustainable Land Management, Food Security, and Greenhouse Gas Fluxes in Terrestrial Ecosystems. This is an extremely long title. Therefore, the report is also known as IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land. And you can have it even shorter. It is called IPCC SRCCL. That's the shortest title. This really important document can be downloaded. It was approved at the 50th session of the IPCC in, I think, 7th or 8th August. The Secretariat, UNCCD Secretariat, was there as an observer. This document was uploaded just recently, so please, you can find here the link to this document. I would also like to inform the distinguished delegates that one of the leaders, IPCC leaders, under whose guidance this report was developed, will also be available at the SPI Science Day in the Rio Pavilions, and will be presenting with several experts who authored this report, will be providing insight into this. I would very much like to highlight one important issue. This IPCC report and its associated technical background document highlights the need for LDN. This is clearly outlined, especially in the chapters 3 and 4. The LDN, the Sustainable Land Management issue, to achieve land-based climate change adaptation and mitigation impacts is clearly also integrated in the summary for policymakers of the IPCC, which was just recently approved. I think it is mentioned, 6, 7 times. I just need to see whether the Secretariat is nodding. Yeah. And therefore, now that we have information on that, I would like confirmation that this data is clear. I would like to say, also include that the SPI submitted 711 comments over the 2 review cycles of the assessment phases. Timelines, again, were given by the IPCC, and we respected these and responded accordingly. So the LDN, as I had just mentioned earlier, is really prominently featured in this document, and also the SLM. And I would like to give one example how the Summary for Policymaker addresses the LDN. I quote, "Policies promoting the target of land degradation neutrality can also support food security, human well-being, and climate change adaptation and mitigation." And this is really, for us as SPI members who really interacted with the IPCC, this is really a good feeling to see how our information doesn't remain in silo, but that the interaction at the international level is leading to very good interaction, and we are coming to similar results. I would now like to point out to the work which we carried out with ITPS, exactly. It's also within Decision 21 COP13 that we have to look in, that we continue to cooperate with the ITPS. And here just one background information. These cooperations did not start with this work program. It's a continued process. Even in the previous SPI work programs, we were requested to cooperate with these organizations. So we cooperated with the ITPS, and together with the ITPS, we decided to contribute to the scientific review of the zero-order draft of the FAO ITPS International Code of Conduct for the use and management of fertilizers. This is important, and it is even more important to highlight that this code of conduct for the use and management of fertilizers, to which the SPI contributed, was endorsed by member countries at the 41st session of the FAO conference in the beginning of August. And we also co-organized under the leadership of FAO the Global Symposium on Soil Erosion, which took place on 15th and 17th May this year in Rome, and with the ITPS and GSP and the International Atomic Energy Agency. With that, we established a common platform to present and discuss the latest information on the status of interventions and innovations in the field of soil erosion and related management. In keeping with Decision 21 COP13, as outlined in the annex of this decision, the SPI also contributed to the development of a think piece of the International Resources Panel titled Land Restoration for Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We authored Chapter 3.7 on land restoration for achieving SDG 7 on affordable and clean energy, and on Chapter 3.15 of this think piece, which addresses land restoration for achieving SDG 15. These details on this collaboration will be provided later on, but they have also led and formed recommendations that will be presented at this plenary. And with this, I would now like to hand over to my colleague, who will be providing more insight into the collaboration with the IPBES and with the IRP. And before handing over, I would just like to point out one thing. My colleague Nicole Barger was coordinating lead author in the IPBES report on land degradation and restoration. And this may show to you that we have multiple ways in which we interacted between these bodies during the past years. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegates, for the opportunity to share our process in looking at the exciting and rich body of work that is being produced by these other intergovernmental bodies. So by its decision 21/COP14 to follow up, our role was to really follow up on land degradation and the restoration assessment conducted by IPBES, and also review the global assessment of biodiversity and ecosystem services, given that time was available to do this. The COP also requested the SPI to review the thematic assessment of land degradation and restoration, analyze its key messages relevant to UNCCD, and present an analysis to you today. So what I'd like to first do is describe the approach that we took as an SBI team. So building on those decisions of first, what we did was analyze the reports and really ask the question, how do some of the key messages from these reports align to the UNCCD context? And then taking a team-based approach, we really identified some of the conclusions that were aligned with UNCCD efforts. And finally, so I'll be presenting those conclusions today, and they're also available to you in the documents that you have available. And finally, what I'll be presenting today are some policy-oriented recommendations. So to further describe our approach and our workflow during the 2018 and 2019 period, what we did first was that we assembled our team and planned how we were going to really approach how we take all of this information that's flowing out of these reports and align it with in UNCCD context. So at the 8th meeting of the SPI, we took on the task of analyzing and aligning the key messages within the UNCCD context. And what I want to draw your attention to is that lower left photo of our team working together. And what we tried to do in this process is build a very inclusive and open process with our team. And we looked at the reports, we started writing on these notes and sharing ideas on what were the key messages coming out of these reports, how do they align with UNCCD? And then you can also see that as we progressed throughout our work, we started really prioritizing based on the first photo into the middle photo. We started prioritizing what are the key conclusions that we can draw and how can these move to policy-oriented recommendations. The other thing I want to point out in this picture in the lower left is the powerful nature of the SPI of having scientists, policymakers, and observers working day after day in the same room together. So many of you probably already know, if you've worked with any scientists, they can go get excited and get a lot off topic. And so the wonderful thing about this team-based approach to identifying policy-oriented recommendations is that we have policymakers and observers in the room with us. We're all working together as a team and being incredibly inclusive. So throughout the process, what we are presenting to you today are these conclusions and recommendations. So first, what I would like to do is highlight the conclusions. Again, these are in the documents in front of you, but I would just like to provide a summary for you for discussion. So the main conclusions, and this is primarily drawn from the IPBES Land Degradation and Restoration Assessment, which are relevant to UNCCD, is first, conclusion 1, as the pace of negative land transformation accelerates, it is necessary to safeguard biodiversity, ecosystem services, and livelihoods in a holistic, integrated, and strategic way. So this really hits on the core of IPBES, and where IPBES and UNCCD really can communicate is with the biodiversity, ecosystem services, and livelihoods. And so what we recognize is that it will require is that land degradation neutrality governance is critically important, and that suitable policy should be enacted to support the implementation of LDN through a common national vision. Second, and I would also like to explain the Roman numerals in these green boxes are aligned to the document that you have in hand, if you would like to review and read along with me. So second, national policies. So the development of national policies, and for example, incentives that ensure land users invest in SLM, so sustainable land management practices, and also development simultaneously of national regulatory measures that link the impact of global diversity loss and land degradation. And also the importance of participation, and I think we will hear this theme over and over, that the systematic inclusion of indigenous and local knowledge in planning and implementation of land degradation neutrality, and also the role of women and youth in ensuring effective management. So the second of the 5 conclusions that I'll be presenting is that national, sub-regional, and regional capacities must be developed to assess land potential in order to facilitate choices which encourage better land use practices that support the achievement of land degradation neutrality. So looking across these different scales, first at global drivers, we recognized that land degradation is driven by global drivers, and therefore there's no one size that fits all. At the regional level, there is a need to embrace a regional approach to support country efforts to develop their own assessment and monitoring capacities, another theme that is recurring. And at the national level, development of national capacities for assessment and monitoring that leverages the use of global facilities and technologies, but also recognizing that there's going to need to be a development of country-specific approaches. Every country is different in terms of its geography, culture, governments, and approaches to deliver solutions to land degradation problems. And then at the local level, recognizing that the implementation of land degradation interventions only at the local scale risk being disconnected from these global drivers that are critically important in driving land degradation at the local scale. And finally, at the local level, again, supporting women in assessing and monitoring land potential, given that they're the primary stewards of the global land base. So conclusion 3 is that achieving land degradation neutrality can be enhanced through sustainable consumption and production flows, patterns, and practices if the existing mechanisms to collect, compile, and share information are integrated so that the flows of consumption are linked to the land which produces what is being consumed. So this requires monitoring and assessment of consumption and production flows, and recognizing that now the advances in monitoring consumption and production flows offers a real opportunity for policymakers. And also the promotion of educational policies that promote education for sustainable development, that offer alternative options and livelihood for all sectors and groups of society. So that summarizes the primary conclusions from the IPBES Land Degradation and Restoration Assessment and some of the key messages from the Global Assessment of Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. What I'd like to move on to is our cooperation with the International Resource Panel. And in the last COP, there was a request to further the cooperation with the IRP in preparing a report on land restoration and the Sustainable Development Goals, with a particular focus on Sustainable Development Goal Target 15.3. And The Conference of Parties also further requested that the SPI contribute and prepare and review the report and to outline policy-oriented options on how land degradation or how land restoration contributes to LDN. So we had contributions by 3 SPI members to the IRP document Land Restoration for Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and International Resource Panel Think Piece in chapters 3.15 and 3.7. And what is really exciting for this week is that the release date will be this Thursday, September 5th. And so it's an exciting time to see what the International Resource Panel has produced in this area. So additional publications considered by the SPI were the LDN Conceptual Framework, the Global Land Outlook, and the Land Degradation Neutrality Checklist, or TPP. So some main conclusions that emerged with this collaboration with the IRP are: first, global momentum towards reversing land degradation could be increased through greater communication and knowledge sharing among major restoration and rehabilitation initiatives that have been launched around the world, something that could be accomplished by communication and knowledge sharing of a mechanism to strengthen communication amongst these initiatives and compiling of the spatial extent and status of restoration and rehabilitation activities worldwide, and sharing the lessons that have been learned. And 2 additional conclusions are that, first, a minimum set of guiding principles would help ensure that restoration and rehabilitation initiatives worldwide strive to achieve a minimum set of socio-ecological benefits, addressing a common set of criteria as a result of sound restoration and rehabilitation measures. So this is really highlighting that we want to have some common set or a minimum set of guiding principles. And finally, improving the potential to achieve co-benefits in restoration and rehabilitation initiatives requires an understanding of actual or potential trade-offs that can emerge and the means to navigate those trade-offs. And this challenge is fully documented in CST2. So finally, from those conclusions, we started building policy-oriented recommendations. And so our summary of recommendations, first, is that we encourage country parties to incorporate LDN into policy and planning across sectors in an integrated way to safeguard biodiversity, ecosystem services, and livelihoods by, first, enhancing institutional capacities at the national, subnational, sub-regional, and regional scale, encouraging national focal points to support coordinating activities to implement LDN measures, so national focal points for CBD, UNCCD, UNFCCC, and encouraging country parties to document and report on all 3 levels of the LDN response hierarchy. Recommendation 2 is the development of national, sub-regional, and regional capacities for assessing land potential in order to facilitate choices which encourage better land use practices that support the achievement of LDN. So encouraging the incorporation of existing data and information, including different knowledge systems into land use planning processes at all levels that support the achievement of LDN, and encouraging north-south, south-south, and triangular cooperation that supports technology, scientific, indigenous local knowledge, and other capacities to achieve LDN. In recommendation 3, enhance the potential to achieve LDN by systematically linking the flows of consumption to the land that produces what is being consumed. So this would involve encouraging country parties to identify mechanisms to minimize adverse economic, social, and environmental impacts leading to land degradation in other country parties. and also raising awareness in urban and peri-urban settings on how consumption patterns impact land from local to global sales levels to facilitate informed choices on consumption. And one key thing that also emerged was identifying mechanisms to reduce food waste and loss through the entire production and distribution chain, recognizing the importance and diversity of indigenous and local knowledge and also practices. So finally, the recommendations 4 and 5. First is to catalyze global momentum towards reversing land degradation by encouraging greater communication and knowledge sharing among the major restoration and rehabilitation initiatives that have been launched around the world. And finally, inviting relevant organizations, such as the Society for Ecological Restoration, and request the SPI to collaborate in ensuring that a minimum set of principles to be developed to guide restoration and rehabilitation initiatives worldwide for achieving a minimum set of common socio-ecological benefits from restoration and rehabilitation measures, ensuring that these principles are aligned with the principles set out in the scientific conceptual framework of LDN. And with that, I would like to thank the distinguished delegates for your time and listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Baja and Dr. Schuster, for this elaborate presentation. No doubt it's the result of incredible teamwork. And on that note, I now open the floor for discussions, comments, and any questions you may have to the Secretariat or the SPI. I will take all comments and then give the floor to the Secretariat and SPI members to respond. Those who wish to make comments or questions are kindly requested to indicate that by pressing the button. I see Switzerland. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Switzerland would like to make comments on this work, and we take note and welcome all the efforts of the SPI to work in synergies with the other scientific panels and bodies as described in the document. And we welcome very much this effort, and this work should be continued. Overall, Switzerland can agree with the conclusions and recommendations, but we would like to recommend some shortening and some revisions. Sometimes it is difficult to see the links between the recommendations and the main text of the document. For instance, women and youth are mentioned in the recommendations, but nowhere in the main text. It would also be necessary to more systematically integrate into the recommendations gender issues, the rights of indigenous peoples, and more generally, the need to address inequality and exclusion in all efforts directed at combating DLDD, mitigating the effects of droughts, and contributing to land degradation neutrality. At present, gender is not mentioned at all in the document. And also the voluntary guidelines for sustainable land tenure are mentioned only in the very last recommendation. Regarding recommendation 3, we propose it should also address agroecological approaches, which we feel have an important potential to contribute to more sustainable production patterns and practices. Finally, no, not finally, another point is Switzerland suggests to scrutinize more closely whether all the recommendations fall into the scope of the UNCCD. As an example, among others, we would like to refer to the recommendations for para 2. Here it says, it requests the Secretariat to explore enhancing UNCCD reporting through the compilation of the spatial extent and status of restoration and rehabilitation activities worldwide. Regarding this statement, Switzerland is of the opinion that this is outside the scope of the UNCCD. And finally, the recommendation should use agreed language on DLDD and LDN and address specifically the relevant and appropriate stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Switzerland, for your intervention. We now have Saudi Arabia.
Shukran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to thank the experts for preparing this important report and addressing the importance of partnerships with other organizations concerned with this important subjects, such as the IPCC and IDPS, and how to benefit from their knowledge and from their reports and conclusions. I have a few remarks regarding the 5 recommendations. The 5 recommendations are excellent. However, they lack a mechanism for implementation, especially that there are great discrepancies in the capacity building and the benefit of the needed technologies and the means of communication between the competent authorities in implementing such recommendations. If there were a mechanism to be put forward to help implement such recommendations at different levels, that would be very useful. If we could focus on a certain mechanism to help us implement such a recommendation, that would be very useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. India agrees to incorporate LDN into policy and planning across sectors in an integrated way to safeguard biodiversity, ecosystem services and livelihoods, and also identify mechanisms to minimize adverse economic, social and environmental impacts while encouraging greater communication knowledge sharing among land restoration initiatives. Also, India appreciates the decision of the COP to develop synergies between SPI, Intergovernmental Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and IPCC, IRP, and Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils. And recently IPCC has published a special report on climate change, desertification, land degradation, sustainable land management, food security, and greenhouse gas fluxes in terrestrial ecosystems, which is a great achievement to bring out synergy among the common elements of the 3 Rio Conventions. The special report on climate change and land responds to the panel decision in 2016 to prepare 3 special reports during the 6th assessment cycle, taking account of proposals from governments and observer organizations. This report addresses greenhouse fluxes in land-based ecosystems, land use and sustainable land management in relation to climate change adaptation and mitigation, desertification, land degradation and food security. And also apart from these issues, India has also encourages synergies between the Stockholm Convention and other Rio Conventions, where it is submitted that one of the contributors to the land degradation has been the inappropriate handling and storage and handling and disposal of hazardous chemicals and waste, which have resulted in contaminated sites or polluted sites. So contaminated sites are areas polluted by toxic and hazardous substances that pose a risk to human health and the environment. These sites may include production areas, landfills, dumps, waste storage and treatment sites, mine tailing sites and spill sites, chemical waste handler and storage sites. In this direction, Government of India has initiated a national project under National Clean Energy Fund, where it's a project is of remediation of the hazardous waste contaminant dump sites in the entire country. Thank you. Over to Chair.
Thank you. I call on Japan to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Allow me first to express our appreciation to the government of India for hosting COP14 so graciously. I also like to thank the UNCCD Secretariat and SPI colleagues for their report and presentations. On this agenda 2C, coordination activities of Science Policy Interface Work Program 2018 to 2019. My delegation appreciates the Secretariat and SPA for the informative report. As discussed earlier today on LDN and drought management mitigation, the coordinated activities are increasingly important to address desertification, land degradation, and climate change in an integrated manner. In this connection, recommendation 1A3 contained in the document CST/4 points out a very important point, that is the usefulness of promoting coordinated actions at the national level. At the same time, in order to facilitate such coordinated actions, it would be useful to share good practice on such a coordinated action at the national level through the regional and international network of information sharing. For this reason, recommendation 4 and recommendation 5 refers to usefulness of information sharing at the international level. Sustainable land management and land regulation neutrality, monitoring and data collection can be supported or supplemented by the monitoring and data collection undertaken for climate change mitigation and monitoring. Taking into account differences, practices, and capacity level for monitoring and data collection, it would be useful to share good practices in facilitating coordinated actions for promoting sustainable land management and land degradation neutrality, including the field level monitoring and drawing multiple environmental and socio-economic benefits. Illustrations of some good practices would help governments and stakeholders in pursuing better coordinated actions on LDN, climate change, and biodiversity conservation. My delegation hopes that throughout of our discussions at CST, we can provide useful directions towards facilitating coordinated actions, including monitoring and data collection, in a way that is scientifically credible and pragmatically feasible in the context of promoting sustainable land management and achieving land degradation neutrality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Japan. We've taken note of your comments. Most of it addressed the issues discussed in the morning, and we would take this up in the contact group. We invite the Republic of Tanzania to take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, we in Tanzania, we are taking the recommendations, and basically, we have been able to come up with a land degradation neutrality target in Tanzania. We concluded last year, and we were able to come up with what we call hotspot areas. We identify the areas which are degraded at different levels, severely degraded areas, slightly, and the areas which are likely to be degraded. So what I see is very important, and what we are trying to do we are now implementing a project, eco-based adaptation in Tanzania, and we are actually planning to have a very good link between the government, local government, and the communities, taking into account what are the issues which are required to be done. And this actually, according to what has been recommended, the collaboration of institutions, the other sectors, Ministry of Agriculture, water, and so on, they are really actually keen on that, and we are sure, based on the recommendation, we're going to reach somewhere. Of course, it will take time, but we still also need your capacity. For example, the Secretariat, the issue of soil organic carbon. We have a carbon monitoring center which actually is going to analyze soils from different areas of Tanzania so that we can improve our database and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I get a feel that we were going to have a very lively negotiation during the contact groups. Still, most of the issues still have to do with the earlier presentations. We take very good note of them. We are keenly interested in these issues coming up clearly in the contact groups. So on that note, I invite Togo. Togo, you have the floor. Togo, you have the floor.
Okay. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you to all of the experts for their presentations. Now, I would like to especially hail the links which have been forged between the different reports. The scientific reports, whether in the field of biodiversity or climate change. However, in all of what we have seen here, what was presented to us, what I didn't quite see was the idea of the African initiative, which already exists. It's the African Initiative for the Restoration of forest landscapes. We are attempting to restore 100 million hectares, degraded hectares, and to do this by 2030. And Togo, my country, which has joined this initiative, on the basis of LDN, things which we have worked on. Well, we have committed, regarding this initiative, committed ourselves to restore 400,000 hectares of degraded land by 2030. This is something which I wanted to share with you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Togo, we give the floor to Niger.
Thank you very much, Chair. Niger is speaking on behalf of the African Group. I would like first, Chair, to congratulate the presenter for the excellent report that was presented before us. Chair, listening to the report, we have identified some key issues that did not strongly transpire from the report that was presented to us. One of the issues, Chair, is with regard to capacity building. Yes, capacity building was presented to some stakeholders, but we do believe that one key actor that should be capacitated is the policymakers. We need strongly in terms of land LDN and other issues related to land degradation and drought that policymakers should be capacitated. So I think this issue did not transpire. The other issue, Chair, is the capitalization of local knowledge, which we consider important, but which does not transpire from what was presented to us. And we, in African group, I think we believe this is very important and crucial for that. The third point, Chair, is the issue of gender. Yes, some of our colleagues raised the issue of gender, but we think that the issue of gender should take into account not only men and women, but youth and old people should strongly transpire or come in. So I think those are the issues, Chair, that we think should be considered in that report. The last point that we have identified and that we think very important is the issue of education, which is not taken strongly into account. And I think we believe that education is a very fundamental issue that needs to be considered if we want to take into account the sustainability or the durability of the actions we are conducting on the ground. With these few points, Chair, that we have identified as very important for the African group, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Niger, for your intervention. We give the floor to Cambodia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Respected SPI team members, and Cambodia would like to thank the government of India for hosting the UNCCD COP14, and also I myself thanks to the UNCCD Secretary for supporting my participation with this COP14. Cambodia would like to congratulate the SPI team for the work done, especially on the translations of the technical findings into the policy-oriented recommendations to cope with land degradation and drought. Cambodia would like to strongly support these main findings and policy synthesis. We, Cambodia, feel that the policy recommendations are still generic in terms of big scales. We therefore would like to suggest that the policy recommendations may be scaled down to regional level, because the problems of land degradations and droughts, its extents and the intensities are specific by regions. So further actions are also required into turning policies into the actions, so that we can see that from the beginning we have synthesis the technical findings into policy oriented, but now I think there's a need also to translate those recommendations into actions. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Cambodia. I see no other requests for the floor. I therefore invite Mr. Baron Orr and the SPI presenters to respond to the comments.
Distinguished delegates, thank you very much for your comments, and thank you very much for your appreciation of the work on coordination activities that was undertaken by the SPI with support of the Secretariat. We have provided, based on our proposals, there are these 5 recommendations, and we believe that by delivering this document, any discussions on the wording and the scoping of these recommendations is not anymore in the mandate of the SPI. It is in the hands of the CST, and therefore we would like to give the Secretariat the floor to provide the information the delegations require. Thank you very much.
So I will work through these comments one by one. The comment made by the honorable delegate from India that focused on the emphasis on integrating LDN into policy and planning and in knowledge sharing, I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that that first part of that was actually one of the most commonly cited points made by focal points that responded to the survey that was put out by the SPI as a very high priority for the achievement of LDN, and that is why it is the first objective in CST document 6, which will be discussed on not tomorrow but the next day. The same day, there is also document CST 5, which actually is focused on the knowledge sharing. So my point simply is that you could build on your suggestions there at that point. The comment made associated with the Stockholm Convention is valid and definitely something that perhaps would be raised in the contact group as something that could be explored. It's not something that we are currently working on in the UNCCD, but I understand why these kinds of proposals are coming in, because these major reports from the from intergovernmental panels and bodies reveal emerging issues, some that are not necessarily currently in the program of work of the UNCCD, but that doesn't mean they can't be introduced as something that could be explored, provide a scientific foundation, and move forward. So I put that back to you for consideration. The comments from Japan focused on several of the recommendations, and in particular I noted the recommendation made by Japan, the honorable delegate, for promoting coordinated actions at the national level and the focus on sharing good practices. And I would note that that wording is a bit different than the convention has proposed, that country parties have proposed in the past, which has been very much focused on SLM best practices, but the idea of sharing good practices on coordination is another thing that might be considered in your future work. The comment made by the honorable delegate from Tanzania about the past work on hotspot analysis, I would draw your attention to one of the recommendations that was brought forward by the SPI, which is related to that comment, which is that the conceptual framework for land degradation neutrality encourages an assessment of land potential prior to the integrated land use planning steps, so that the appropriate land use, the most appropriate land use for each location could be identified. So this is something that also could be considered when you're discussing that particular recommendation. The comment made that is associated with ecosystem-based adaptation, the Secretariat has noted the fact that sustainable land management is the term that we use inside of this convention, but is not the term that's used inside Biodiversity Convention and the Climate Change Convention. Instead, the term you used, which is ecosystem-based adaptation, as well as nature-based solutions, are used. There's a commonality among these, and the document CST5, which will be discussed the day after tomorrow, actually encourages that we look for cohesion across these, so that's something to look forward to and explore. The, one second. The comment made by the honorable delegate from Togo that talked about the major restoration initiative in African forests, landscapes, is well noted and actually relates to one of the recommendations made by the SPI members, which pointed out that there are many very important restoration initiatives around the world, and maybe we can make a lot more out of these if we had some cohesion, not necessarily governance, but just simply cohesion, some common principles, and a little bit more communication that would actually make a big difference globally for the key aspect of land degradation neutrality, which is reversing past degradation. The honorable delegate from Niger, who, speaking on behalf of the Africa group, raised in a very important way the capacity building issue. It is noted that when we were discussing in the morning CST document 2, this issue is also part of those recommendations. And I do want to emphasize that from a strategic point of view for the UNCCD, capacity building and the vision forward is part of CREEC document 8, which of course is being discussed in the CREEC plenary. There also was mention of gender, and there is also a gender action plan that is also being discussed in the CREEC plenary. And I note that it was mentioned in the document CST2, but in different ways. These are not the same sides of the story. So as you approach the contact group and you take that concern into consideration, I simply wished to draw your attention to these other places where the topic is being addressed. The comment made by the honorable delegate from Cambodia, talking about the fact that the recommendations, while strong, are not yet scaled, so the relevance at the regional level is not built in, and this is something that could be brought to the attention of the contact group. And the same thing I will say on your last comment about translating policies into actions. The CST Bureau and the SPI overall were very concerned about putting you in the position from the perspective of analyzing the science to have recommendations that were actionable, so that that very step that you proposed could be taken. And obviously that would be more moving into the policy realm and a little less in the science realm, but it's well noted. And with that, I have addressed, I think.
So this is for Togo, because we as SPI we also work in the IRP initiative, and the Forest Landscape Initiative is mentioned in the IRP.
Okay. I would, just apologies, I missed an important point for the honorable delegate from Togo, that the African Forest Landscape Initiative is actually mentioned directly in the IRP report, which was analyzed by the SPI, and which we've learned will be launched here at COP14 on Thursday. I believe it's going to happen in the Science Day event in the Rio Convention's Pavilion, if I've understood correctly. And that then brings me to the end of responding to the comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barham, or Ms. Mariam Akhtar-Schuster and Ms. Nicole Baja for this engagement. Distinguished delegates, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for an interesting exchange this afternoon.
I missed 2 countries. What? I missed 2 countries. I missed a whole page. I missed 2 countries, and they're really important.
Distinguished distinguished delegates, my attention has been drawn. Some very critical comments that were made by some parties have not been addressed by the SPI and the Secretariat. I'm sorry for that omission. I invite the SPI and the Secretariat to address those quickly, then we proceed.
My apologies, I turned the page too quickly. I want to note the comments made by the Honorable Delegate from Switzerland, which both welcomed this work on collaboration with intergovernmental bodies and panels, and also made some excellent recommendations on the need to look at things like gender, indigenous populations, inclusion, and that these were not mentioned in the document directly, even though I think what was implied is that they were part of the IPES and IRP reports. I will say that there is a sub-recommendation that does focus on local and indigenous knowledge, and this also is addressed at a certain level in the document CST2, but your comment is well noted and perhaps can be remedied in the contact group. The recommendation that 3 and the agroecological approaches is certainly something that could be contributed there, and the comment that was made related to the spatial extent of restoration, the idea of mapping that, I will point out that this is something that was a conclusion drawn by the SPI in part because of the inputs that have been coming in from the survey and the recognition that to succeed with LDN, we need to understand where we are actually reversing land degradation. Whether it's appropriate in this body or not is of course something for you to consider, but the need for it is unquestioned. And I also noted the comment about agreed language on DLDD and LDN. And there also were comments from the Honorable Delegate from Saudi Arabia, who put some emphasis on these partnerships that have been developing. I did want to mention in that comment that you will have noted in the document that each of these coordination activities has a different relationship. I thought Mariam explained that in great detail, that we definitely abide by the processes of these bodies, but there was a major achievement during the biennium, and that is that a memorandum of cooperation was established between the UNCCD and IPES, which puts us in even with the biodiversity conventions, which had already had these in place, and has definitely meant a very fluid relationship that has been drawn from that. And I also noted from the Honorable Delegate from Saudi Arabia that there is a lack of a mechanism for implementation on these recommendations. And I will say that this is a point that was discussed in great detail by the SPI while they were analyzing these key messages and the CST Bureau, and the conclusion that was reached was that they might be overreaching if they went from analysis of the key messages and recommendations that were actionable all the way to the mechanism before you had adopted the actions. And so the point is well noted and perhaps is the next step, but there was a concern that it would be not overly ambitious, but simply it wasn't clear yet whether these would go forward, so that was not done at this stage. I think I now have addressed all of the comments, and I apologize again to those two parties.
Thank you, Mr. Orr. Before closing this agenda item, I'd like to present some concluding remarks. Our colleagues from the SPI introduced all 6 coordination activities undertaken by the SPI. The extensive review, scientific review by all representatives of the SPI has contributed to major reports by the IPCC, IBES, ITPS, and IRP. The SPI also analyzed in depth 3 of these and then provided key messages and policy proposals for your consideration on emerging issues relevant to the UNCCD. The timeliness of these proposals have the potential to help us all address these emerging issues at the global and national levels. The committee has thus concluded its discussion of agenda item 2C. Further discussions will take place in the contact group to be established. I now invite the committee to turn its attention to the establishment of the CST contact group and the appointment of its facilitator. The CST Bureau has proposed the establishment of 1 contact group on matters relating to the committee. It is my understanding that Mr. Martti Numelin of Finland has been proposed as facilitator of this contact group. May I take it that the committee wishes to establish 1 contact group on matters relating to the Committee on Science and Technology as proposed by the Bureau, and to appoint Mr. Martti Numelin of Finland as facilitator? Hearing no objection, it is so decided. The first meeting of the contact group will take place today, 3rd September, immediately after the adjournment of this meeting until 10 p.m. in Met 18. May I also take it that the committee wishes to have a joint CREEC CST contact group meeting, given the agenda of the 2 committees? Hearing no objection, it is so decided. The first meeting of the joint contact group will take place on 5th September. The exact timing of the meeting and conference room will be announced in the Daily Journal. Our next meeting is tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. in the main meeting room. main committee room, this room. This meeting, I would invite the Secretariat to give us some announcements.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to inform delegates that tomorrow, 4 September, in the afternoon, as of 3 p.m., a short meeting of the Conference of the Parties will be convened in the plenary hall as to finalize the election of the Vice Presidents of the COP Bureau and designate the rapporteur. This will enable the COP14 Bureau to start its work. The afternoon meetings of the CST and CRIC will be convened immediately after the adjournment of the COP plenary. This information will be also included in the journal for tomorrow. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Secretariat, for this very important announcement. This meeting is adjourned.